The purpose of this session was really to bring these people together to share different expertises, strategies to how to better secure land rights for local and indigenous communities all over the world. My name is Clémence Abès. I'm the Land Rights Now coordinator. The Land Rights Now campaign is a campaign that seeks to really support and campaign and influence different strategies to secure land rights for vulnerable communities in all type of geographies and again all over the world. So I also wanted to kind of share with you a little bit how these the idea of this session and this webinar started. We know that securing land rights can take a really long amount of time, and it takes a lot of energy, and it also often comes with a lot of obstacles. And a lot of people who are joining the call today or who work on land rights, who work supporting environmental defenders and climate activists know that this is a struggle that can be often complicated, even more when those are happening in countries where the political context, sometimes the governments are also putting obstacles towards accessing land rights and respecting and protecting the lives and the rights of environmental defenders. And this is also why we need to have examples of strategies that are succeeding. We need to hear from people who have brought the voices of indigenous leaders in the biggest forums and international arenas. We need to hear from lawyers who have been working on legal strategies to secure wins for indigenous communities and who have succeeded in doing so. And so we are hoping that this session will both inspire others, land rights advocates, to continue their work and to learn from all these big scope of strategies, but also to connect with people, to continue their discussion, and to really
concluyan.
More empowered and less alone in the different fights to secure human rights and land rights for indigenous and local communities in the world. Welcome again, and thank you for taking the time to be here. Archana, you are an indigenous and climate activist from India, and you are a member of the UN Youth Advisory on Climate Change, who directly reports to Antonio Gutierrez. And you are also a board member of Land Rights Now. And I'm interested in hearing you discuss about how your journey has been to bring the voices of young indigenous people to international arenas, how you're linking your activism between land rights and climate change, and what you can share with us of going from local to international arenas, what you can share with us in terms of what you're seeing, where change is happening, and what also gives you hope to continue with the fights that you are leading. So Archana, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Clemens, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here joining and interacting with you all. As Clemens has raised the questions in terms of intersectionality between land rights and climate action, I would like to start sharing across that when we are talking about land rights and climate action, across the globe, we see that indigenous peoples and local communities have been fighting for land rights and forest rights and recognition of the rights over the land, forests and territories over the years. So I see climate action from a lens of reclaiming spaces of indigenous people and local communities, because I feel that the indigenous people and local communities have been contributing to climate action since their ages through the traditional knowledge and practices, through their way of living, through their governance systems and practices.
Durante su sistema,
I think we have been advocating for climate action through our fights for land rights, through our fights for forest rights, and which also, if we see at the moment, is like the indigenous people, for them, for us, land rights and forest rights is very critical for our existence, which also brings down to the narrative and worldview of indigenous people and local communities. Like for us indigenous people, land, forest is a source of identity. It's not a commercial commodity as other communities sees, and that's why land and forest has been a source of identity, culture, tradition, and language. And we have a strong relationship with nature and forest and land, which also brings down to a correlation of our way of living and practices, which again brings down then if there is non-recognition of our land rights and forest rights, it's anyway putting us in the radar of eviction, land grabbing, migration, loss of our culture, identity, which again brings down to a vicious circle of or narrative that indigenous people are contributing to climate action. But how they are contributing to climate action? They're contributing to climate action through their traditional knowledge and practices, through their community-led forest protection practices, and through their way of living, their sustainable farming patterns, their food, sustainable food practices. And what is that based on or rooted on? It's based and rooted on their relationship with nature and forest. So if that relationship is not respected and recognized and acknowledged, then we are anyway creating more hurdles for indigenous people to contribute towards climate action, which again brings down towards the perspective of, we see that how the impacts of climate crisis has made indigenous people more vulnerable, and it also makes them more vulnerable when their land rights and forest rights is not recognized. So it's also very important to link up that how climate mitigation, how climate adaptation and resilience is very strongly related with land rights and forest rights of indigenous people. And that's why I think, and I would like to propose, and we have been advocating for that, that rights of indigenous people over the land, forest, and territories needs to be a crucial and integral part of climate action, which also needs to be reflected in the climate adaptation and mitigation and resilience policies across the globe and adopted by the national government, which again brings down to the fact that we do have a IPCC report on climate. And it was for the first time in 2019 that we saw recognition of rights of indigenous people over the land, forests, and territories was recognized. And I feel that it is not only in IPCC report, but also we see it in the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration report also, where we see recognition of rights of indigenous people over the land, forests, and territories, supporting their traditional knowledge and practices has been recognized. And that's why I feel there has been a transition from a place where indigenous people were looked down for the traditional knowledge and practices, for their identity, for the culture and tradition for years. We were told backward and savage and underdeveloped because of our traditional knowledge and practices. But over the years, it's now the world is recognizing that how those traditional knowledge and practices, how our own way of living is important for climate action. So there's been a transition, but again, I feel that it needs to come from a place of understanding and respect, and it needs not come from a place of, oh, now finally we are recognizing it. I think there's a serious need to undo these injustices, which again brings down from a perspective of how do you undo these injustices, and how do we ensure more of indigenous youth participation, women participation, and indigenous peoples and local communities participation in general in these processes, because you have made them feel inferior for ages and years for their traditional knowledge and practices, which has lead to loss of identity and culture and tradition. Now all of a sudden you are wanting them to be part of the processes, because you realize that they were the ones who have been adopting or who have been practicing the eco-friendly way of living, the traditional knowledge and practices. So for me, as a way to go ahead in this entire discourse is like meaningful leadership and participation of indigenous people and local communities. Land rights and forest rights needs to be core of this entire discourse of climate action, biodiversity conservation, and environmental restoration also. At the same time, I would like to emphasize that climate policies needs to be inclusive and should adopt the worldview of indigenous people and local communities. Because if we do not acknowledge the worldview of indigenous people and local communities, and if we do not respect them, we are again creating policies which will make them more vulnerable and marginalize them. And that's why I feel free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous people and local communities is crucial, which again brings down to a meaningful and adequate participatory approach needs to be adopted by different stakeholders in this entire processes. And that's why I have been advocating that indigenous people and local communities should be leaders of climate actions and not victims of climate policies. And as an indigenous person, what I would like to share with my indigenous brothers and sisters, and what I would like to say with elders, is that I think our indigenous elders are the ones from whom I draw my inspiration. And I feel it's really crucial for us indigenous youth to stay connected with the indigenous elders and go back to the elders, because I think the learning, the experience of our indigenous elders is really, really crucial to go ahead in this entire discourse. And at the same time, I also feel that it's really, really crucial for us indigenous youth to embrace our identity, because I do understand how difficult at times becomes to embrace identity because of the constant imposition and colonialism and racism and discrimination which we face. But I think it's also really very critical to embrace our identity and be proud of ourselves, because now slowly the world is recognizing it, and we can go ahead strongly accessing these spaces because of our identity and culture and tradition. Also because we need to make sure that we are the bridge from the elder generation to the younger generation, embracing identities and carrying it forward. Because I think what makes us unique as a community is our culture, tradition, and language, which is at stake because of climate crisis, which is at stake because of extractive developmental projects, which is at stake because of faulty policies implementations. And that's why I feel it's really, really crucial for us to access the policy making spaces, because nothing about us without us is what we have been advocating. And briefly touching upon my journey and ending it is like, what I feel is like our indigenous youth and indigenous people
indígena se juntan.
We need to be doing different roles in this entire processes. And I would like to say that pick up the interest or the expertise or the thematics which you like, because we all can contribute to the processes. We all can be part of this processes in a different levels, like whether it is in the thematic of research, whether it is thematic of education, whether it is in the thematic of art, science, and many more. I think it's also really important for us to choose the kind of work which we want to do for contributing back to a community and advocating for the spaces in the international levels. At the same time, I also feel that it's really important for us to preserve our culture and tradition and language, but it is very important to also ensure that how we are embracing the challenges which we are facing and which requires a huge amount of research and documentation, and research and documentation not in the form which has been proposed, but research and documentation in our own way, because most of our histories and culture and traditions are in an oral history in the form of songs, dance, folklores, and all of it. So I think it's really important also that how we need to advocate for documentation of traditional knowledge and practices, preservation of those. And at the same time, I also feel it's really important for us to speak up. And I feel it's really critical at times to speak up. And that's why I feel group work or collective action is really important. And which also brings down that it's also becomes very difficult to understand laws at times. So it's really important that we break down the laws and try and understand these perspectives through collective learning processes, which again brings down to me for the fact that often we talk about climate finance. I do believe climate finance is very critical, and we need to make sure that the allocation of fund reaches out to indigenous people, young people and women all together. But I would also like to emphasize that we need climate finance for dialogue also, intergenerational learning also, because interpretation for us indigenous people is core when access to language, documents, report is being restrained because of no language diversities. And that's why I would like to just sum up by saying 3 points is like, we all are unique. We all have different ways of contributing to the processes, and we need to choose our own way to contribute to the processes. The second thing is it's really important to speak up and embrace our identity and be proud of ourselves. Third, our ancestors have given their life, their entire way to fight for our land rights, forest rights, and assert their identity. I think it's a strong responsibility and huge responsibility for us indigenous youth to take this ahead, push forward for stronger policies, implementation of the policies, and make sure that we take our identity, cultures, and tradition ahead, because the world needs us. The world is willing to listen to us. It took a lot of time to come there. Are we ready and willing to speak out? I think we all are willing and ready to speak up, but we also need safe and enabling spaces. So yes, we indigenous people are willing to work together with everyone in solidarity. We request you to understand us, respect us, and give us the space to work together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Archana, for sharing both like your experience, but also the thoughts that you're having, and what you were saying right now is like it took a long time to kind of access those spaces that were usually closed to youth and to indigenous peoples, but now this is something where we see change, and the connection with other organizations, with intergenerational in an intergenerational perspective is also really important. And thank you also for linking like land rights to climate, to biodiversity, and to the current discussion on climate finance, and why it is also important to talk about that when we talk about indigenous land rights and the intergenerational approach. We are going to continue the discussion, and please, if you have like also questions for Archana, let us know in the chat. Archana might have to leave a little bit earlier, but I want to thank you again for taking the time to set up the discussion here too. We are going to continue the discussion now, going to Mexico with Alejandra and Cheita, and just to give a brief introduction of Alejandra. So Alejandra is a Mexican human rights lawyer and an activist, and she is the founder and executive director of the Mexico City-based NGO Prodesk. And since 2005, she and her team have led processes to protect economic, social, and cultural rights, reaching unprecedented results, like the historic win against a major wind power company in Oaxaca, Mexico, that we are going kind of to zoom in. We're going to have like a deep dive for the next 15 minutes on this case. Alejandra, just before I give you the floor, we wanted to introduce this section with a short video that will kind of help us to set up the scene. And I do think for all of you who are with us today, that what I personally found really impressing in the case is both what Alejandra will explain to us of how an indigenous communities from Oaxaca have been able to kind of stand up and to resist to a huge electricity company, but also to think about how in the discussion that we're having about energy transition, this case is also showing us how replicating extractive models and really large scale models to go to kind of advocate for an energy transition is not the right path. And the way that business as usual is addressing the energy transition is putting more pressure on land and violating more rights of indigenous peoples, as it's the case that Alejandra is going to explain to us. So I think that this is such an important case to hear and learn from it right now because of the conversation that is happening also on climate and energy transition. So Pablo, I'm going to let you set up the video.
¿Cómo una comunidad indígena logró la cancelación de un megaproyecto eólico en Oaxaca? Brut explica en 60 segundos. En 2017...
In 2017, the government granted the French company EDF a permit to build the Guanacegaru wind farm. The project was located on 79 hectares of communal land in the isthmus of Tehuantepec, specifically in Oaxaca, in Unión Hidalgo. This would prevent activities such as agriculture and livestock farming, and would have 115 wind turbines near homes, which would put the inhabitants at risk. The Zapotec community of Unión Hidalgo, along with the Pro-Desk NGO, initiated a legal struggle denouncing abusive contracts, violation of human rights, and appropriation of communal lands. After 5 years of defending the right to land and territory, they achieved cancellation of the project on 2nd of June after CFE cancelled the contract of Eólica Oaxaca, which was a subsidiary of EDF. The cancellation constitutes a milestone for the defense of the land and territory and natural assets for agrarian and indigenous communities and for corporate accountability in Mexico and Latin America.
Thank you. So Alejandra will give you the floor to react on the video and also explain to us how the case started and how did you achieve the major win that you're going to share with us.
Thank you so much, Clemens. First, I would like to thank the colleagues at Oxfam Novib and the Land Rights Now campaign for inviting me to this event. And I also wanted to salute my fellow panelists. My name is Alejandra Ancheita. I am the director of Pro-Desk. Pro-Desk has been focused to defend the rights to land, territory, and natural resources of indigenous communities and also labor rights of workers, in particularly female workers. At Pro-Desk, we work with a comprehensive approach that considers the defense of human rights through strategic litigation, strategic communication, advocacy, and research, supporting human rights defenders and also groups and communities. And that is important because in our experience, communities and NGOs in the global south have to take every tool available and use them in a creative way to defend human rights. To answer the question, Unión Hidalgo is an agrarian and indigenous community in southern Mexico, located in the Istmo of Tehuantepec. The region of the Istmo of Tehuantepec in the Mexican state of Oaxaca became popular for wind farms, project implementation for its excellent potential of wind resource. Almost 95% of all wind electricity in Mexico is generated in the region. And the region is also home to a variety of indigenous peoples who have kept their culture and languages. It is also a region with high levels of poverty due to ongoing dispositions of land that started during the colonial rule and continue to this very day. The construction of the over 30 wind parks in the region has been highly controversial, and the promoters, the companies, and the government have failed to address violations of economic, social, and cultural rights. In 2013, the indigenous community of Unión Hidalgo approached PRODESC to analyze how to defend their land, territory, and natural resources from wind energy corporations. The first wind park installed in their community did not receive the consent of the community and meant that wind turbines were now really close to their homes, affecting their livelihoods. In 2016, after rumors were spread in the community, it was known that Électricité de France, EDF, was interested in building what would have been the biggest wind park in Latin America, the project Guna-Sicaru. This wind park did not receive the consent from the community, and EDF failed to recognize that the lands in Unión Hidalgo are communal property and not individually owned. After learning from past experiences, PRODESC and the community put all of their efforts to prevent the construction of the wind park from the very beginning. What followed after 2016 were a series of pressures from the company and its subsidiaries in Mexico, as well as different levels of government to push the construction of the wind park without considering the rights of the community. In November 2018, after years of litigation, a federal judge ruled that an indigenous consultation had to be implemented with the highest international standards. This was also a result of the support to organize the community to sustain the fight for their human rights. At the same time, alongside our colleagues from the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, the community and PRODESC filed a lawsuit in France under the French Corporate of Vigilance law that actually forces French corporations to address and prevent human rights violations in their corporate activities overseas. The case was only the third presented under this law and the first presented by an indigenous community in the American continent. PRODESC has a methodology of comprehensive approach, which we implemented in the defense of the community of Unión Hidalgo. This comprehensive approach included, as I say, a strategic litigation, advocacy, documentation of strategic information, which include also financial information from corporations, supporting capacities for human rights defenders, strategic communication, and supporting also the collective structures of the communities. PRODESC only supports collective cases, but as a feminist organization, also PRODESC addresses and analyzes the feminist impacts that women suffer just for the fact of being women. With this in mind, we supported the community by opening advocacy spaces, by promoting the security of human rights defenders, by providing tools for communications, and by also supporting the core group to continue in the defense of their human rights. We believe that we have to use law in a critical way, and that we have to use all the tools that are provided to us. Let's remember that when we are defending a community, we are facing both the states and the corporations who have almost infinite time and money, and the legal defense focus in the dual characteristics of the community as an agrarian and indigenous community. We started legal procedures using the Mexican agrarian law, while at the same time we use the legal frameworks regarding indigenous people's rights. For example, demanding that the community provided a free, prior, and informed consent according to to what has been established at the ILO 169 convention. We also investigated the contracts between the Commission of Federal Electricity, which is the company that has the monopoly of buying electricity in Mexico, and also between an EDF. With this information, we knew that EDF's wind park should have been built by now and is not doing so. The Commission of Federal Electricity had in this moment the opportunity to resign the contract without any penalization. As I mentioned it earlier, we set up an advocacy and legal strategy in Europe, along with the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, and with the support of CCFD Terror of Solidarity, we were able to reach French audiences. Advocacy activities also play a huge role to achieve this victory. One of the most recent achievements was the communication by 4 UN special rapporteurs to France, Mexico, and Électricité de France, mentioning their concerns about the Gunasi-Karu project. This was a result of the work that protests carry out with the Global Initiative for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Some of the challenges that we think are important to share with all the audience and my colleagues. Challenges were an important part of this process, but before naming them, I would like to stress that even with these challenges, we were able to get a victory. This shows that with organization and collective power from communities alongside the professional work of NGOs, we can stop the ongoing disposition of land, territory, and natural resources. Maybe some of the challenges seem obvious, but I would like to mention them anyway. The first of all is the corporate capture of the state. We have seen time and time again that people from corporations then go to high positions in the government. They enact new policies that favor corporations, and then they go back to the corporations. That is one of the many examples I could provide regarding the capture of the states, and one of that we analyzed in a specific document in the context of the Gunasi-Karu project in 2018. Judicial times in Mexico are also another challenge. And there is a real possibility of the communities just losing the interest of getting frustrating when they see that the cases move so slowly. To avoid this, it was important that lawyers at protest were in constant touch and communication with the community to solve any questions that might have. Constant communication from our legal team to the community was also very important to address this challenge in the judiciary system. Another challenge is how to do this job in a country that is lethal for human rights defenders and journalists, and particularly defenders of land, territory, and natural resources. We have seen that whenever we reach a partial victory on a case, or we had a productive meeting with a stakeholder, something happened. I also recognize that the human rights defenders from the community take the worst part of this, and we work actively to protect them. Prodesk knows the challenges of talking about renewable energies and linking this to human rights violations. However, human rights violations do happen, and Mexico and the community of Hidalgo are an example of this. Renewable energy is presented as the future of mankind and intrinsically good. However, we believe that the construction of a new development model does not mean that there are people who are disposable or that have to suffer sacrifices so that everyone else can be saved. A green transition without a human rights approach can be as harmful to the community as a fossil fuel approach, and the communities have had enough. That is another point that I would like to stress in this talk, because we have analyzed that these justifications come mostly from the global north. In order to answer what led to the success of the case and how it was received in Mexico, I would like to share that the success of the case came from a continued professional and passionate work of more than 5 years from the community of Unión Hidalgo and the team at ProDesk. We used every tool in our toolbox. We knocked on every door. We positioned the case any way that we could. We tested innovative law strategies, and what is more important, we were able to stop the construction of the wind park before it happened. Other communities in Mexico and Latin America have approached to us following the victory to ask for our assessment. We are witnessing that wind and solar energy are causing huge human rights violations across our continent. EDF has been publicly silent on the case. We know that they have asked for more information to the judge, and some people interested in the construction of the park have said that the project is not canceled, but let me be very clear, without the electricity permits, EDF can't build its Gunasicaru projects. In Mexico, the reception has been good. NGO and other communities have expressed their recognition to the years of struggle in defense of the community and ProDesk. We couldn't be happier for this principally, because it is not only a legal victory, but it's also a real victory for the community in the defense to the land, territory, and natural resources. The next steps in these regards is that we want to continue to emphasize that Unión Hidalgo case shows the model of development that has been pushed for the mainstream media, the government, and corporations. This development model lives outside the ideas that indigenous communities have for their own territories, and it pushed them out of their land, territory, and natural resources. ProDesk will be vigilant of the new European laws of due diligence to verify that they actually do good on their promise to defend human rights in the global south. And to close, what comes next for ProDesk is to continue the defense of economic, social, and cultural rights in Mexico. We have a long way to go to have the country and the world that our children deserve. And principally, we would like to push also, as Archana was saying in her participation, that the voices of communities and people that are really affected by the climate crisis and the energy transition are being heard in the discussions from in the country and also in the international spaces. Those voices have to be there and have to be listened. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alejandra. I'm really like thinking about what you shared with us now, and you said a phrase saying like a green transition without a human rights approach can be as harmful as a fossil as an energy matrix depending on fossil fuels, all fossil fuels extraction, and I do think that this is really important to have in mind, and I'm also linking for the next intervention. You also raised the risks that indigenous and environmental defenders take in Mexico when they are confronted to corruption and to state capture, and this is also something to make a transition. I'm sure we will come back to the case during the Q&A session. Also wanted to say that we are going to share with you a link where we are putting resources on each of the cases that we are hearing today. So if you want to continue to learn, a lot of them are just we're putting link from different news that ProDesk has been sharing or videos that they have produced also to continue to learn about the case. But yeah, so thank you again for that, and we will come back to it. And I'm linking the situation of human rights and environmental defenders in Mexico to the situation that Silvana is going to explain to us now in Peru. Peru has really seen a rise in both the criminalization and the threats to environmental defenders since 2020. Actually, since 2020, more than 14 environmental defenders have been killed in Peru, which was much more than the precedent years. And the National Coordination on Human Rights in Peru is recording more than 1,000 cases of criminalization. 70% of them are indigenous and land and environmental defenders. I'm going to give the floor to Silvana now, so she can also explain to us what is happening in Peru, what are the threats to environmental defenders, specifically in the Amazon, which is such an important region, both for indigenous communities and also for the stabilization of the climate crisis, as we know. Silvana Valdomino is an environmental lawyer from Peru, and she's also the program director on biodiversity and indigenous peoples at the SPDA, the Sociedad Peruana de Derecho Ambiental, who is a leading legal organization in Peru for environmental law. And Silvana, through her work, supports environmental defenders in the Amazon. Silvana is also joined by an environmental defender from Madre de Dios, Julio Cusurici, who I will introduce just after. Silvana, muchas gracias por estar con nosotros hoy y esta mañana desde Lima.
Silvana, thank you very much for being here. I'm going to give you the floor to explain a little bit more what is the situation of the environmental advocates in Peru, which are the main threats, and how from the SPD are focusing this work. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this invitation. The case of Peru is a very complex one. There was a huge increase of deaths of activists for the environment, and this is linked to the illegality. The pandemic, with the pandemic, there was a huge rise of illegal activities in the Peruvian forest, mining, illegal mining, drug trafficking in the indigenous people's land. So these are activities that with the corruption are being increasing, and these put the lives of the environmental advocates in risk. As you said, 70% of the people of the environment activists that have been killed in the last years, 70% are indigenous people. In Peru, there is a delay in the right assignment to the indigenous peoples to achieve the legal security and facing illegality threatening these peoples. There were a few changes or improvements in the legal context for the environment activists. There is still a lot of work to do, and the work is not about recognizing the rights, but also the existence of means to protect indigenous peoples and those forest sectors against this corruption they are facing. In the case of Mexico, the case of Peru is different because this is a ghost. They are mafias. There is a reinvention of them. Sometimes you fight the impact of the illegal mining operators, but suddenly they go to another place. So it is very difficult to face this threat. This is why they are this ghost is so strong. This illegality ghost, and that is linked to corruption, different levels, regional, national levels, and they put the life of the environment advocates in risk. There is also lack of legal security, there is no recognized right to make them more visible in the country. And this makes the number of deaths increase. This phenomenon is growing faster and faster. These indigenous peoples have been fighting against this illegality that is invading their lands. Because the Amazonian, the Peruvian Amazonian is a world heritage asset. I want to be brief. Julio will explain this from an indigenous perspective. We need to strengthen the protection framework. We need to empower the communities, indigenous peoples, so that they are able to defend themselves against the threats towards their territories. But this is also a country framework, because illegal mining is a strong phenomenon that must be fought against from all the levels, legal, and other levels. And this goes through a very sad process at the government level, with many changes. I think in the last 5 years, we had 5 presidents, for example. So against this instability, there is an increase of the disorder that makes the corruption increase. So the less government, or the government achieves a lower number of areas. So we need to keep empowering these peoples, because the best way to mitigate this impact is to have our indigenous and local communities empowered. So this is a life protection measure, because they are the ones that are facing actions that the government itself should be leading. So I want to give the floor to Julio to introduce the indigenous vision of what is happening with the indigenous lands and peoples. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Silvana. Julio Cuchurichi is with us. Julio is the president of FENAMAP, the Federation of Native Communities of Madre de Dios region. We represent 37 communities in the Madre de Dios region. Julio, thank you very much for being here from Puerto de Maldonado. I know that your work as a president of this federation is like in the front line of the threats against the indigenous peoples and the Amazon forests that Silvana was describing. And I would like you to share which way you are seeing things in Madre de Dios, because this is a region that has been threatened by illegal mining and other type of destructive industries. But I'm going to give you the floor so that you can explain yourself all these issues. And thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for inviting us to participate in this event. Thank you very much for all the organizers, my name is Julio Cuchurichi. As Silvana said, I am the president of Madre de Dios Native community, representing 37 communities in the region of Madre de Dios in the south of the Amazonia. It is part of the ANESET, a national association. We have the COICA, the International Association of the Amazon Basin Indigenous Communities. We are part of the TICA consortium. I'm going to give a brief summary of the main issues we are dealing with. The issue of the legal security of the territories, the indigenous communities living in isolation, health, because the pandemic has been a very complex issue. The health issues for the communities, because our knowledge with the medical plans help to prevent many deaths because of the pandemic. The education issue is also very important to have indigenous professional teachers. Another issue is related to the government, to our government, that is working behind us in the social plans. We are not taking part of the design of these social plans. The issue about indigenous women, that is very important, work hand in hand together on this issue, the youth issue, because we see that the youth is very much isolated from community, and youth should be incorporated because they are the ones who are going to be leading their community. So it is very important to get their incorporation. Another issue is with all what we are doing, there is a huge threat for us as the leaders who are leading all these issues, because all these issues are faced against a big issue, the drug trafficking, illegal mining, the protection of rights. So all this put our lives in risk.
El hecho de defender sus territorios, pero hasta ahí nomás.
Many leaders in Peru have died defending their territories, and our governments are doing very little about all of this. So I will now talk about legal security. For us as indigenous peoples, as was mentioned earlier, territory and land as indigenous peoples is very important. Without our land, we are destined to disappear. We will be erased. So this is why it's important to reference geographically all of the indigenous territories. Some countries are doing better than others. In Peru, they are not doing very well. Sometimes the superficial layer of the earth is being referenced. And for example, forests have belonged to local communities, to indigenous communities for many centuries. But now governments are saying, well, okay, you can use the forest for exploitation, but I am still the owner of it, which is not right, obviously. So in terms of territoriality and land rights, it's important to remember that we have still a lot of work to do to achieve a status where the land is, say, fully ours. So we have also tried to implement these topics with some allies, like some NGOs and other allies who have helped us work in terms of legislation and have tried to help us achieve legal security. But we have gone forward, we have achieved many things, but there are many things yet still to get. And this is really what I wanted to do, because I think legal security for us, for our land, means the survival as indigenous peoples, which is paramount for us. And as I said, we are working hand in hand with the participation of women, who play a crucial role, not only in terms of nourishment and feeding the communities, but also in terms of this struggle, if you like. It's important to carry on with our collaborations and within the framework of the COP26 agreement. These agreements have to reinforce these initiatives because we are the stakeholders who are contributing. So this planet is not so feverish, so warm, if you like. So I think this is what we're doing. I think we could do a lot more, and it's paramount to carry on working together jointly. And this really this is my summary of what we are doing in Madre de Dios. This is a very critical issue because we do this, we defend rights, and we have been complained about and by timber companies, but really we are only defending our livelihoods and our brothers and sisters' livelihoods. And we are being subjected to complaints in court by timber companies, and they are ruling in favor of these big companies who are working and putting in danger isolated communities under natural resources. Thank you very much, Julio, for what you have shared with us and for reminding us the importance, or the immense importance, and of legal security for defending the land, that communities and indigenous peoples can have the rights, recognize the rights over their land, recognized, which enables them to defend their land with better guarantees of success. It allows them more resilience as well. And thank you for reminding the international community of the need for financing. Archana mentioned this as well at the beginning of this webinar, but obviously climate financing, those on the first line of this struggle, and those defending communities and forests and natural resources in the first line are really the ones who need this direct financing. And it's thanks to them, to their work and their efforts. And this has to be recognized by different institutions at national and international level, and finance has to reach them to reinforce and to support their work. So thank you, Julio. And I don't know if there are any questions. At the end, we will redirect them to you if there are any questions for you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Intervention that we will have for this webinar. I'm feeling again really grateful and happy that we're having that conversation, and I'm going to pass the mic, to say so, to Danielle Kobe. Danielle, I think that you are here. Let us know if you can put your camera on. I'm going to introduce you first. I'm going to start in introducing you. So Danielle is the founder and executive director of the Ojai's People Development Program, which is a Kenyan-based NGO working to secure human and land rights for the indigenous Ojai communities and other indigenous peoples across Kenya and Africa. And Danielle, you have led the Ojai to win more than 8-year legal battle over land and human rights abuses at the African Court on Human and People's Rights. That court is based in Arusha in Tanzania. And really recently, actually last week, you secured a major victory for the Ojai people. And I would love for you to share both the case that you and of what the Ojai people have been experiencing and struggling over the past year to also protect their way of life and their forests. And if you can also take us through the legal battle and the recent victory that you went to. Just before I give you the floor, I just wanted to, we want to share with you a really short video that will also set up the scene so everybody can be in a way in Kenya with you.
Echek kokiek kingesiche ko kikibitu en emoni ko korenyon.
Daniel, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for Land Rights for inviting me to this interesting webinar. As you have been told, our issue about land and the way my fellow panelists have really discussed is something which I can say is long. And sometimes when I see I'm given 10 minutes, I wonder the story is so long. I don't know where to start and where to end. But let me be very, very candid to say that the Ogiek community in Kenya, which is a population of 52,000 people, and in this case, we are talking about the Ogiek of Mao Forest Complex. So for us, the issue of Mao or the issue of land has a very different connotation because we are talking about our life, about our customs, our culture, that kind of spirituality linked to the land, and the perspective that we are staying and we are part and parcel of that forest. We have lived, and our ancestors have been there in Mao Forest Complex, but unfortunately, the government of Kenya did not recognize the custodianship and the ownership of Mao, that it belongs to the Ogiek community. This led to the Ogiek going to courts here in Kenya for a period of 12 years without any success. You could go to court today, you are told the file is missing. Next day, the judge is sick. The next day, it has been adjourned because of one reason or the other. And it went years and years. Amidst all this, evictions could not be stopped, even when there were orders from court saying there should be no eviction of the Ogiek community in Mao. Still, it could happen. So the Ogiek community have undergone a lot of challenges because of being evicted in their own ancestral land. They have also faced the challenges of missing in education, because there were a time when the schools were closed down, so the Ogiek children could not go to school. So if you are a girl and you are 12 years and the school is closed for 5 years, after five years, that girl is married off and is not going to continue with school. So all these challenges meant that the next step, so when it came to around the year 2009, there was a 14-day notice that all people to leave Mao, including Ogiek. And that means that we never had anywhere else to go. That is then we started now going to the regional court by going to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights in Banjul, the Gambia. That took another almost 2 years. And then later on, the African Commission, after citing mass violations, which were in this, they decided let's push or rather transfer the case to the African court. So from 2012, the court stayed in the African court up to the year 2017. That is 2017, on the 26th May 2017, the African court ruled in favor of the Ogiek. But when they were doing that, they withheld reparation, which stayed also for a period another 5 years. That is up to this year, that is 23rd of June 2022. That in that 5 years, the government decided they were forming task forces, trying to masquerade like they wanted to implement the decision of the African court, which they never did. They even came up with a report called Dr. Kibuki's task force. They never released that report to date. So the 23rd of June, we had another win, a landmark win in the African court, giving us a majority of the things we requested, including restitution of our land, where it was key for us. Of course, there were some funds like 157 million Kenya shillings to be for the damages which the community faced. But we don't really see that as key. Our key for us is the fact that we have been given restitution to be in control of our land. But as we do all this, you could imagine a period of almost 20 years being in court, in and out of court. The kind of fatigue, the kind of discouragement the community had, waiting, the patience. And amidst all this, also there were a lot of threats. A sister from Mexico mentioned, we have also faced the fact that most of our people have been arrested, and most of them have had cases. And you are being threatened sometimes to withdraw the case. You are told you better withdraw the case if you want to be given position in government. And some of them were arrested many times, including women. But let me say one thing, that what gave us the strength is the fact that we have had women by our side. And many people have been saying, you could see those women who are singing. These were some of the motivating factors which kept us moving, which kept us saying, yes, we can get it. Doesn't matter how long it will take, despite the delays. I know, yes, we have the win. But what can we say? Will the government of Kenya respect and implement the decision? Are they even going to pay the compensation which the court gave, and when? So it is only we move and decide, and rather try to lobby with like-minded friends across the globe, because the win was not for the Ogiek alone. It is for the indigenous peoples of Africa and the world. It doesn't say that really, that everything, what is key for us is that that win is there. It will go to the books. Doesn't matter how long it will take, is that the Mao and Ogiek has been declared the indigenous peoples of Kenya. And above all, they rule that the culture, the language, and then that the Ogiek should receive free, prior, informed consent in whatever is happening in Mao. That whatever, if there are concessions, or they must be negotiated by the Ogiek community. If there is any investment, they must be negotiated by the Ogiek community. That FPIC principle, I know it is not yet accepted, mostly in most countries in Africa, but at least we know in CPD and other international instruments and conventions, they have already accepted FPIC. But as of yet, we have already even developed biocultural protocols to be able to help us. And even we are in the process of developing FPIC protocols so that it helps us to guide us in ensuring we protect the environment. Because what the government have been trying to show is the fact that the Ogiek are causing destruction and deforestation. But they have not been able to prove in any way, because now that Mao still existing is because the Ogiek have been there and we have that link with our ancestors. And there's no one day we are thinking of moving or not being part of that. So this win, we need the world to hear and speak to the government of Kenya that it is their duty and obligation to implement the Ogiek case, as it will also become precedent to many countries where indigenous people have suffered. The Batwa currently issues in Loliondo, many other areas where problems are being faced by indigenous peoples. So today, I was saying, I don't know where to end the story. The issue is we are now connected with young people who are using social media. And I want to appreciate the media because they brought the issues of Ogiek to the light when nobody ever knew us as minorities, as indigenous peoples. But the media fraternity across the globe and in Kenya have made the issues of Ogiek known. And I think as I wrap up, is to say that the indigenous peoples are facing equal or similar challenges across the globe. From Mexico, from wherever, when I heard the stories, it's like there's not much different with what is happening in Kenya. And one, people don't like us by protecting our own environment, our own home. It's our environment which is making people to fight us. And I don't know why, because somebody wants to create a plantation for tea, for maize, for wheat, in the expense of the big forests, the big trees, which are existing in Mao. And today, let me say, I think we need more time so that I can tell the story from Addis Ababa all the way to Banjul, to Arusha, to Kenya. Even as we are talking, the other domestic cases, which are coming up because of frequent eviction, even amid this COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing with us both like these so really important victory, but also like the challenges and what also like kind of gave hope to keep going amid the different obstacles that you had. And I'm also taking the you mentioned like the strength of the women who the Ogiek women who have been there since the beginning and who like haven't lost hope to continue. And this is something that that also kind of fueled the fight and brought to the victory that you secured last week. And this is something, the strength of indigenous women was also mentioned by Julio earlier for the Peruvian case. But I'm seeing a lot of connection also with what we heard from Mexico and what we also heard from Peru. The importance to go and knock on every door and like find different solutions. You didn't have an answer at a local court, so you went for a regional one. And also I'm like underlining the fact that a victory for the indigenous people, the Ogiek communities, is a victory for all indigenous peoples in Africa, because the recognition of these courts has an impact on a regional level. It's the same thing in Mexico. The precedent that is set by canceling a major wind project has an impact for all the rights of indigenous people in Mexico, and supporting indigenous defenders in Peru in the Amazon, securing land rights of indigenous peoples have an impact for the whole Amazon. So I'm really seeing all the connections there. We have 5 minutes to close the discussion. And I just wanted to say again, sorry for the interruption at the beginning of the session. The first 10 minutes were a little bit chaotic, and we lost a few minutes there to have a broader discussion. So I might take 1 or 2 questions if we're having questions from the audience. We haven't seen questions in the Q&A or in the chat, but I don't know if any of you have something that they want to say right now. It's now or never. Otherwise, I will also ask maybe to the speakers if they have any last comments that they would like to share, any reaction from what they heard through these hour and a half together. Giving a last opportunity. But I think that people are like really satisfied and they have listened to all the conversation. So if there are no further comments or questions, I would like to close the discussion, being also like saying again, thank you for the speakers that were with us today. I really feel really grateful to have been able to kind of create a space of an hour and a half to hear for the amazing work that you're doing. And I also hope that this space will be useful for you to continue to connect, that now that you know each other better, for the participants that were online or in the LANDac conference physically, to get to know your work and to write to you or to connect, to invite you to other panels, because I think that the cases that we have heard today need to continue to be explained and heard in other forums and other audiences. I want to thank in particular also the indigenous leaders that were with us today, that are like feeling firsthand the consequences of the threats that they have to deal with in their territory, with their forests and waters and territories. So all our solidarity with you, and thanks again for taking the time to be here. A lot of like, just to let you know that we will share again the link to the different connections, that the different resources that you can have to continue to learn about those cases. You can also write to us if you have any questions that might come up after. I just want to close that intervention saying that a lot of important things have also been mentioned regarding to land rights, but also to climate change. The need to think about a transition, which we all want to, but with a human rights approach. The need to have climate funds accessible for indigenous communities. The need also to continue to have a really vivid community as the one that you're seeing here in a Zoom moment, of indigenous leaders, of activists, of campaigners, of lawyers being together to advance land rights and human rights all over the world. So thank you again. I've learned so much from you. I hope that you have all learned from those other experiences, and let's continue to be connected. Thank you again to the LANDac conference for giving us the opportunity to be part of the program of this 2022 session. So muchísimas gracias a todos los que se han conectado.
Thank you very much to all those who are connected.
Twitter, Facebook, Instagram accounts of Land Rights Now. We will broadcast and share the whole recording of this session through our social media. Thank you again.